Hello everyone, and thank you for joining our annual Science Career Panel. My name is Ilaria Drago and I am the Head of Education Outreach here at the Max Planck, Florida Institute for Neuroscience. To start today, I want to thank all the three panelists. Thank you so much for joining us and for finding some time on your very busy experiment schedule to talk with me and to all the audience about your experience as a scientist. So thank you so much. To start, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself, and I'm going to start with Connon. Connon, can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to become a scientist and what are you currently doing in the electron microscopy core here at the Max Planck Florida Institute for Neuroscience? Connon.
Thanks, Ilaria. Yeah, my name is Connon Thomas. I am a research assistant in the electron microscopy facility here at MPFI. I'm also a master's student at FAU, and I've always loved science since I was a little kid. I was doing science experiments and projects. That's what really got me interested in science in general and also biology. And I did my undergraduate work in a small university up in upstate New York called the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I studied conservation biology there, which is not at all related to what I'm studying now, but I actually minored in microscopy. So I learned how to use different types of microscopes. And when it was time for me to graduate, I decided to actually use the skills that I had just learned. And I applied to Max Planck, and I got a position as a research technician, using the microscopes and collecting images. And I've been here for the last about 6.5 years. And I do electron microscopy, which lets us look at the very, very tiniest things in the brain, the structures of the brain, to understand how the brain works and how the structure relates to the function of neurons. Yeah, so that's what I'm up to in the electron microscopy facility.
Thank you so much, Connon. And second, we have Dr. Ilika Ghosh from the Rangaraju Lab. Ilika, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're currently studying in the Rangaraju Lab?
Hi, thank you, Ilaria. So first of all, I am so delighted to be a part of this career panel. My name is Ilika Ghosh, and I'm a Post Doctoral Fellow in the Neuroenergetics Lab at MPFI, led by Dr. Vidya Rangaraju. I'm originally from India, and that's where I did my school and university education. And I would say my journey towards becoming a scientist began in high school during the experimental biology classes, where I was looking at leaves. So, I mean, the structure and the chloroplast and the fine venation of leaves, they totally fascinated me. So I decided I want to pursue my higher education in plant biology. And I majored in plant biology and did my undergrad. And then I did a master's in the same subject. And after that, I thought that why not move on to cell biology for a PhD, because cells are common to both plants and animals. And to understand the basic physiology of life, it's important to understand how the cell cycle runs. So that's why I did a PhD in cell biology. And in my PhD, I worked with brain cells and the DNA of a portion of the brain called the hippocampus, where memories are stored. So it totally incited my interest in neuroscience at that time. So I thought that if I ever do a postdoc, it's got to be in neuroscience. But before that, I thought, okay, I need to learn a bit of techniques, and imaging was coming up and it was really big in the scientific community. So I decided to go to Japan and learn some cryo-electron microscopy techniques, as Connon said, to see the really tiny structures inside the brain. So I wanted to learn how to see them when the sample is close to the living state. So I used a technique called cryo-electron tomography there. A lot of technical terms, I'm not getting into details, but yeah, after that, I'm finally here. I applied for the postdoc position, and I'm so happy to be a part of the MPFI family. I'm currently studying how memories are powered by some structures called mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the brain cells. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Ilika. We are excited to have you here. And last but not least, Ingo Asbeck from the Bolton Lab. Ingo, how did you decide to be a scientist, and what are you currently working on in the Bolton Lab?
Yeah, thank you, Ilaria. So yeah, also for me, I think I took a little bit of a detour to end up in neuroscience. So ever since high school, I always liked biology, and even before that, I had little toy microscopes and was just playing around with these little experimental things at home. And I was always interested and fascinated by the body, like how processes work in the body, just how things are put together, physiology, pathophysiology. So I decided to study nutritional science after high school, and I got a bachelor's and a master's in nutritional science. And during my master's, I joined a lab that did research related to neuroscience. So they studied protein-protein interactions of different cell adhesion molecules, which I ended up doing a master thesis on, just looking at different interaction partners with different techniques on how you would study if proteins bind and interact with each other, and also looked a little bit at physiological consequences of that. And that kind of led me into the neuroscience world. And I applied for my PhD and got accepted here into the Bolton Lab. And I'm currently studying autism mouse models. So the Bolton Lab in general looks at circuit disorders and circuit dysfunctions of in autism and schizophrenia mouse models. So this is what I'm working with. I'm trying to understand how a certain genetic mutation that is associated with autism alters the brain connectivity, brain circuits. So on a morphological level, just how different areas in the brain are wired together or connected with each other, and how that potentially translates into altered functions between different brain areas and altered communications between different areas and different cells.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Ingo. And now I'm going to really go on the real part of this career panel. This is going to ask you the question that we receive from the students, from our audience, through the education email address. So thank you to everyone that submitted question for our panelists. So I'm going to start with the first one that we received for more than one student. That is, can you describe how your typical day look like, if there is any typical day? And we are going to start with Connon. How does your day usually look like?
Just like you said, there's very rarely a typical day. It's always different for me. I spend a lot of time imaging. So on the microscope, collecting images of cells and organelles. I also spend a lot of time at the computer. So I do a lot of image analysis, image processing, writing of manuscripts and drafting things. We also have to prepare the samples for electron microscopy, so I spend quite a bit of time doing that as well. So it's always something a little bit different every day. And I also work on several different projects at once. So always something different, which is really exciting for me. I really enjoyed that aspect of my job, is I'm always doing something different, and that's really exciting for me.
Thank you, Connon. Ilika, how does your typical day look like?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because I would get to lab in the morning and the first thing I do is grab a coffee. That is common for my daily routine. So once I get the caffeine in my system, it's usually a lot of sitting in front of the computer rather than doing wet lab experiments. I would say I do wet lab experiments like twice a week. And the rest of the days of the week is always either data analysis or image processing, because my project is heavily based on imaging, working on the microscope. So we need to actually, the real experiment is on the computer. once you get all the images from the microscope. So yeah, it's mostly working on data analysis. And yes, Zoom meetings are also a typical part. So now that we have the pandemic going on, so it's mostly meetings online, talking to my PI, discussing my results, etc. Yeah, that's what it looks like.
And for those of you who don't know, like we are using this jargon, like PI stand for Principal Investigator. That is what we will imagine as the boss of the lab. That is the one that is getting the funding for the research and is the one that is then deciding the general direction of the lab and is supervising the experiments. Thank you, Ilika. Ingo, how does your typical day look like? I think we already kind of found out that there are no typical days in science, and it's something that is very exciting for a lot of scientists, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I also start my day with a coffee. I typically sit down and just review a little bit of what my day is going to look like. But I have structured most of my days kind of in like experiment blocks. So often what I do is I do 1 or 2 weeks of the same thing pretty much. So I would go through 1 or 2 weeks of sample preparation, for example, so mounting tissue. Then I would go through a week or 2 or 3 of imaging and then an image analysis. So my days can actually be about the same thing, like relatively repetitive, but it would change from 1 week or to another or 2 to 3 weeks. But yes, it is, if you were to it is very, it's not the same because you have to go through the motions of an experiment, which can be from, like the others said, imaging, image analysis, presenting the data and all of that. That is a very big part of it for sure. And that's also where I spend a lot of time.
Thank you so much. So I totally agree that one of the best things of being a scientist is that no day looks like the previous one. And that is one of the things that is most exciting for us, because there is always something new to do, something different, and new things to learn, correct? I think also another thing that I really enjoy when I was doing experiments on the bench is that you are still constantly learning, right? So a big part is also reading new research. The next question that we receive is, if you have to name one thing about your everyday job that you didn't expect when you sit and it's like, oh, let me go and work in a lab. What is one thing that you didn't expect? And we are going to start with Ilika.
Okay, so I didn't expect that working in science would give me the opportunity of communication. And by communication, I mean a lot of writing. And I really enjoy writing. And it kind of like boosts up the creativity in me. It's not just poetic creativity, it's also done in a scientifically structured manner, which gives me the training to actually present my data in a more appealing way. So I would say the part about writing and communication, like giving presentations and talking in front of an audience, is really surprising, because I thought working in science is just wearing a lab coat and doing experiments. It's not that only. So yeah, that was pretty surprising.
That's really true. Connon, what is one thing that you didn't expect going off
of Ilika's answer and also the previous question? One thing I didn't expect was, as a kid, you always expected that science was, someone in a lab coat pipetting something, swirling blue liquid, but it's not like that in a lot of cases. And really, I probably spend the most time in front of my computer, either writing or doing experiments at the computer. And also there's a lot of coding that's involved, which I didn't expect really. So using the computer and trying to figure things out yourself and creating code is something that I would have loved to get more experience in before coming here. But yeah, that's definitely something that we kind of had. I think a lot of people have this mindset that it's all, you're at a bench, you're doing, physical experiments, but it's a lot of sitting in the office and doing experiments there.
That is true. Ingo, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for sure. So I was surprised how many teaching and mentoring opportunities you can actually have, especially as you go on in your career and your journey, as you become more experienced in your PhD, and then of course later in your postdoc, that you are able to, when you have undergrads come into the lab, or even high school students that come for an internship, or even other grad students that are a couple of years behind you that need help with experiments, with analysis, and you can walk them through different aspects of their experiments, and you can help them out and teach them by just by being there and talking them through it. And you have a lot more experience, for example, using certain techniques or certain equipment that you can just pass on and mentor and teach other students on.
Yeah, and you're an amazing mentor, Ingo. So thank you so much for also doing that for the next generation of scientists. The next question we receive, and I'm going to ask it to Ilika, since you are the most senior here in the panelists, is that the question we receive is like, do you have any advice for students that might be interested in a career in doing research, but they are not 100% sure about it?
Yeah, I would say that a career in research is very rewarding because it involves the joy of discovery and making the impossible happen. So it is a nice career path to choose, but then again, we also need to figure out what we love doing. So there is no hard and fast rule that a career in research is a successful career. There is nothing like that. So if you're really good at something, I would say just go for it. Don't hold yourself back.
Yeah, and also I will add that there is nothing bad about tipping your toes into research, and then realizing that it's not for you, that like getting a lot of frustration out of experiments is like, I don't like it. So there is always time to change your mind. And talking about frustration, another question we receive, and I'm going to ask this to everyone, is like, what is the most challenging part of your job? And I'm going to start from Ingo. What is the most challenging part of your job?
I think one of the most challenging things is that you have to have a certain level of frustration tolerance, basically, because you work with biology, you work in a biological system, and you have an idea of what you want to study or what hypothesis you're following, but you can be wrong. You build your experiments around trying to figure that out, and it might just not work out, right? Just because you work in biology, and biology had different ideas. Also, maybe the way you designed your experiment around what you want to study is just not the best way to go about it, and you have different or negative results that you just need to address and maybe figure out if there's a better way to come up with a question or redesign your experiment. So that is something that can be very frustrating.
Yeah. And I don't know if you agree with me, but I think that if we have to decide a percentage as a scientist, most time you are wrong, or the things just don't work because the solution, the machines, is like, it is amazing when you finally discover something, but most of the time you don't discover much that day.
Yes.
Connon, what's the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ingo. And one thing that's always been challenging for me is just staying on top of the recent literature and always reading and making sure that I know what's going on right now in science. It's very easy to kind of be like, oh, well, I already worked really hard today. I don't really feel like reading anything. But it's always good to either start your day, reading an article with coffee, or, go home and really quick just skim through the literature a little bit. Otherwise, it's hard to know what questions there are to answer. Maybe someone already answered some of the questions that you have in your mind, and you have to kind of be flexible in that way. So definitely reading consistently is challenging, but it's definitely necessary.
Yeah, that's another great point. I totally agree. Sometimes when you go and read literature, it can be overwhelming, the amount of things you need
So
to
much
go
so,
through
yeah.
to be up to date and to keep doing science that is relevant. You don't want to spend days and days doing an experiment that someone already did. That's a good point. Ilika, what's in your opinion the most challenging part of your job?
I would say coding, because I never expected that I would have to learn coding but to be a researcher. So I don't have a background in computer science, but research also involves coding nowadays. And you need to actually customize your experiments and write your own scripts for data analysis. I think that is quite challenging for me because I spend a lot of time trying to figure out the various computer science languages. So I would say that is a little bit of a challenge, but it's fun. It's really fun because I didn't know that it's going to be possible for a person like me to do it. So I like it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a common thing that we already heard from you guys more than once, that computer science, computer analysis, coding is something very common in the life of a scientist nowadays. It probably was not 20 years ago, but it is something also artificial intelligence. We heard a lot for image analysis. And so it can be a good idea, even if you're not sure you want to be a scientist in the bench, to kind of have a little bit of background about that. It's going to be useful in a lot of careers in the future. So if our audience needs to take home one message, it can be that one, that coding is going to be more and more important in STEM related careers. And talking about careers, Ingo, you are the one that is doing a PhD and you are close to finishing. Congratulations. So can you tell a little bit about our audience what earning a PhD implies and what can you do after you earn that doctor title? And this applies in your case to neuroscience, but I think it's pretty in general also with other STEM basis PhD like cell biology or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically when you start graduate school, you have about, let's say, between 4 and 6 years on average that it takes you to finish your project and your PhD. Most graduate schools have some sort of a midpoint challenge or midpoint exam where you propose your research. So it's like a mini defense of what you propose on doing for your PhD project. Sometimes also depending on the university, you are required to finish a publication or submit a publication before you can graduate and go on defend your thesis. But let's say you go through, you defend your PhD successfully, you basically have 2 pathways that you can go at the end. So you can do the classic academia career track where you aspire to become a professor at a university or PI, principal investigator at a research institute like Max Planck. So you would go on after your PhD and do a postdoc, what Ilika is doing right now, basically. And you typically, Ilika, correct me if I'm wrong, but you do a postdoc for between 3 and 6 years maybe before you can think about applying for PI positions and hopefully get that. The other track you can do is an industry career, and there are, especially with a PhD in neuroscience, but pretty much any STEM field, you have a lot of different options that you can do after. One thing you can think about, since you're already kind of in the university system, and if you like program design, you can go into the grad school program designing, the coordination of your program. You can do work there, or you can go outside of academia entirely and go, for example, into sales. So a lot of people doing their PhD or postdoc work with a certain piece of equipment that can be a microscope. We all work with microscopes, for example. You could go on and sell these microscopes if you want to. You can go on and work for a microscope company as something like a field application scientist or field application specialist, where you would go into different universities and research institutes and help them set up their system, teach the staff and other researchers on how to use the system and get the best images for their project, for their purpose. You can go on, if you are very good in coding, for example, you can go on into data management and data science for different companies if you want to do that. You can still do science if you want to go into a company that does science-related stuff. There's lots of companies out there that design drugs, for example, or viruses that need still, wet lab scientists, basically, where you would still work on the bench or microscopes and design whatever you would, whatever products you would be working on. You can do that. You could go into teaching, for example, as well. You could teach community college classes. You could even teach high school STEM classes, for example. You can go into pharmaceutical industries. You can go into policy making. You can go into science communication. So you see there's lots of different career options that you have available, and you can really find something that fits your unique abilities and unique skill set and your unique strength set as well.
I could add to that. Yeah, a PhD is definitely one option. It's also possible to be in science and not have a PhD. So for example, I came out with my bachelor's and I was able to get a research technician position. And I was, already starting to do science, and I've sort of been doing similar science to someone who's doing their PhD. I would say one benefit of being a technician and doing that kind of track is that I don't know, in my case, I've been able to work on different projects, which is something that was really a benefit for me, not picking a PhD, because in a PhD, you're kind of focused on one question and one set of projects, whereas I get to kind of do a bunch of different projects and different things, which is really exciting for me. And there are other career paths, outside of just being a technician. So always be flexible. You don't think that you have to do a PhD. Of course, having a PhD is really excellent and opens up a lot of possibilities, but there are other options as well.
Yeah, that's a really great message. There is not just one path to work in a lab and to do research. Ilika, do you have anything to add about?
I want to add to this that I chose the path of doing a postdoc because I wanted to expand my skill set after PhD. As you can see, I have a varied research background from plant science to cell biology to imaging and now neuroscience. So if you want to broaden your research skills, then go for a postdoc like me. And after postdoc, things start to narrow down a little bit because now you're older and you have crossed a lot of hurdles and you would expect more from yourself. So there are two paths to take after postdoc. One is industry and the second one is academia. So if you want to stay in academia, it's fair enough. It's amazing, actually. So it is also a lot of pressure because you need to get grants in order to be the boss of a lab. So with that in mind, it's also very rewarding because you're adding a lot of inputs to the scientific growth as a whole. But if you want to choose industry, it's amazing too because you'll get paid a lot of money. So yeah, after a postdoc, getting into industry is a very lucrative option. As Ingo outlined, the various industries that you can go to pharmaceuticals, you can go to software, you can go, if you're good in coding, you can, and you can also do toxicology. Like there are so many new toxicology companies coming up nowadays in the US. So after a postdoc, these are pretty lucrative options. And also teaching is the last option, not the last but not the least. So teaching is also quite a good way of spending the rest of your life because I love teaching. So that is something that I would consider after my postdoc.
Thank you. A lot of questions that we receive are focused on advice for high schoolers that needs to pick their college. And so I'm going to ask this question primarily to Connon because you are the one that did all your college training here in the United States. So it is a choice that can seem overwhelming because there are a lot of options. What is your advice from your personal experience and also from what you saw from all the undergraduates that we have at Max Planck going through the lab? Do you have any advice?
Yes. that is a great question. Maybe I could just tell about a little bit more about my experience. So when I was in high school, I had decided that I really wanted to do something that combined biology and environmental science. And so when I was looking for schools, I was looking for somewhere that had a good program in something like conservation biology or ecology. And so that kind of narrowed down the list a little bit. And I also decided that I wanted to go to a school outside of the state I was in. I'm from Ohio. And I also wanted a smaller school. So those were sort of the three things that I used to narrow my search a little bit. And from there were only a handful of schools for me that fit that criteria. So I ended up picking the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. But I would say it's not really that big of a deal where you do your undergrad. If you get to study something that you're really interested in, and if you're able to find researchers at that institute or that university that are doing something you're really interested in, that's where you should go. Because the thing that really matters in research is getting experience. The grades, yeah, like getting good grades is important. Where you came from, not very important for your undergrad. What you really want to do is focus on finding a lab that does really cool research that you're really interested in, and you want to get a position there. You want to get a position in a lab. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just getting some experience while you're an undergrad is going to help you a lot after you graduate. The point where picking the school starts to matter is when you go to graduate school, and then when you're doing a postdoc, you want to pick, that's a little bit more important. But for undergrad, not super important. So that's my advice.
Thank you, Connon. Ingo, do you have anything to add from your experience on what you saw while here at Max Planck? Do you have any advice for students that have to pick their undergraduate path?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways from this panel can be that all three of us have very different backgrounds. None of us studied neuroscience in undergrad, and we have friends that studied physics, for example, in undergrad, or chemistry, biochemistry, something like that. So basically, there are a lot of different ways to get into neuroscience if you're really interested into that. But I think it's very important what Connon said, that it doesn't really matter that much for your undergrad where you go. It's more important that you get experience. Yes, grades are somewhat important, but for me, when I looked at mentoring and teaching undergrads, what was really important to me is that, do you have prior experience? Do you know how to pipette? Can you help me out with doing certain experiments? Of course, we can teach you a lot, and you're going to learn the stuff that you're going to be doing. But if you have already some sort of knowledge and skill set around the lab and around data analysis, for example, or some sort of other technique that can be helpful, that's really a plus that is going to be very important for you, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree that sometimes we think a lot about the name, but especially for undergrad, it is not that important. It is more important the experience, building connections, and really figuring out if what you're planning to do is what you like. Because as I think another common theme that I'm hearing from you is that one thing is what you imagine that being a scientist is, and one other thing is the day-to-day grind. And I think this is common for many other careers. Ilika, do you have anything to add about this?
And I would also add that getting into an Ivy League is not super important, because what's important is your experience at the end of the day. So having an Ivy League brand is good, but if you have it, it's fine. But there is no pressure at all. I mean, going to a community college is also fine, as long as you're doing what you like, and as long as the research you're choosing is something that aligns with what you plan to do maybe 5 years later or 10 years later. So I think planning in this regard is very important. You could have a 5-year plan for yourself. at this point in high school. And then you could also change paths. So it's fine to change paths as well, like all of us have done. But we have one thing in common, that is we wanted to do research, and that's what we're doing. So if you're interested in research, it doesn't matter if you're coming from an Ivy League or a non-Ivy League.
Yes, thank you so much. Another question that we receive from more than one person is, what's the more rewarding part of your job? And I'm going to start from Ingo. What's the most rewarding part of your job?
I think the most rewarding part is when you get the result that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So like I said earlier, you work in biological systems and things don't always work out the way you want it to. But when it actually works out and you get what you're looking for and it looks great, that's the most rewarding, because you are so heavily invested into the success of your project and your experiment that is really this hooray moment when you finally see how things are working out for you. That's awesome.
You have a rush, right?
Yes.
Joy.
Connon, what's the most rewarding part of your job?
Yeah, very similar to what Ingo said. So I do a lot of imaging, and I do a lot of 3D imaging of brain tissue with electron microscopy. And the most exciting part for me is when I have just finished an imaging run, and I've got 1,000 images, and I stack them together, and I get to just scan through the brain. That is just like so cool to me. Just looking at like all these different synapses that no one's ever seen before. Like, this is a brain tissue. This is where we think. It's incredible to me every time. So that's the most exciting part.
Ilika, what is the most exciting part?
Yeah, it's pretty similar to what they said. Going back to the joy of discovery. So I have really ambitious experiments, which I think, okay, it may not work. But then after all those long hours in the lab grinding for days, when the experiment actually works and I get an amazing image, that is something very rewarding. And when that translates into getting a grant or having a research paper, I think it's like a yeah moment at that time. So I literally work hard for that particular moment.
Yeah, I would add to that. A lot of people maybe think that the most exciting part is publishing.
Yeah,
I've published papers, and it is exciting, but at that point, when you've published a paper, you're just tired. So like that isn't the most exciting part to me. There's like a 30-second period after it was accepted that I'm like,
accepted.
Yeah, but then I'm like, oh, okay, what's next?
Yeah,
you just got to get into keeping it going. So.
And just to give a little bit of background to our viewers, when we say we publish a paper, it's basically when you have an hypothesis, you do all your experiment, and then you package everything together. You send it to journals that publish new research. There are other scientists that review and give you comments on your experiment. Sometimes they can ask you, not sometimes, basically all the time, they ask you to do more experiments to confirm that really what you did is solid, and it is that your hypothesis is really confirmed, and then they publish it on their website, in their journal, for the whole scientific community to see. So now everyone else that is, for example, working on mitochondria energetics in the brain, in the case of Ilika, can go online and read their research. They know, okay, Ilika discovered this, how this impact my research. So we all build on the research of other scientists and on what they already discover. So yes, I totally agree that you have the rush of the research, but by the time the paper is finished, you are so over it and you cannot wait to jump on the next project. And since we have a little bit of time left, I think I can ask you another extra question. Someone asked, what is something particular that you like about working specifically at Max Planck? And I can start by answering the one thing that I enjoy specifically about Max Planck, but that you can see also in other institutes, obviously, is how international and diverse it is. If I didn't go into science, I don't think I will ever had the opportunity to meet people from all these different backgrounds and cultures, and you have this common theme of the love for science. And for example, for me, I can talk with Ilika about mitochondria for hours, and we are so excited about it. And so it is a great opportunity to know the world, and also pre-pandemic, hopefully soon, to travel the world, because a big part of being a scientist is to go to conferences, to share your knowledge, and in doing that you can also travel the world. And again, it is something that I would have never been able to do if I was not a scientist, and especially in a place like Max Planck that is able to support your research and support you traveling to conferences. So what is something special about science, specifically about Max Planck, that you enjoy? Connon, I can see you smiling, so I can maybe start with you.
I 100% agree with you. The diversity at Max Planck is amazing. It's an amazing experience for me, getting to see so many different types of people, so many smart people. Working with them is just fantastic, fantastic opportunity. I also think that Max Planck is probably one of the best places to do science in the world, specifically Max Planck Florida Institute. There are so many things that we have that other places you won't have. We have a machine shop that can make stuff for us, which is not common. We have the electron microscopy facility in-house, which is not common for a lot of places to have. And we're a pretty small size, and I think that's really amazing. I think we're the perfect size, because everyone knows everyone else, and we get to talk with each other and talk about experiments, and people I'm collaborating with on projects. I can just go upstairs if I have a question and ask them, or be like, hey, come down and look at this. I want to show you something. That's amazing. That's something that you don't get anywhere else. So so many things make this place great to work at.
Ingo, what has been your experience specifically here?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Connon said. I think the support system and support structure that we have here is phenomenal. So one, the scientific support, like Connon said, if you want to image something with EM, for example, you just go down to Connon and say, hey, I'm thinking about imaging this. How can we do this? If I want to do some light microscopy imaging and I need to figure out the best way to image something, there's tons of people that I can ask. If there's a question that I have around coding, I can find me some people that are really that know coding really well, and I can ask them. And then on the other hand, we also have a great support system in all other endeavors that we want to do. So you mentioned earlier being able to travel to conferences that we're supported with, but also depending on where you are in the stage of your career, you can find support. If you want to go into teaching, for example, there's opportunities to start mentoring and teaching undergrad students, to give lectures if you want to do that. And there's all kinds of other just opportunities that are opened up for you. If whatever you want to do, it's supported basically.
Ilika, do you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that I love the collaborative environment within Max Planck, because I can walk into any lab and learn anything I want. And that support is tremendous. Because say, for example, I want to learn something to do with electron microscopy, I can easily walk into Connon's lab and ask anyone there, and they're going to help. Everyone has such a beautiful, helpful attitude around here. I think it's the best place to do science. Everyone talks to everyone. I love that. Like if you're walking down the corridor, even if you don't know the person, you would smile and say hi, and they would say hi back. And that makes everything so warm, and the positivity energy over here is amazing. So it totally makes your day, like a little smile, that's it. It's amazing. And the second thing that I want to talk about is that there is a lot of funding support around here, because if you want to do science, we have a seminar series called Curiosity Meets Discovery. And I would say this is like a motto of Max Planck here. So if you want to do science, you have all the support related to anything that you need. So I really like that.
I would say that the take-home message from this is that if someone wants to do science, to not just focus on the project, but also to where we are going. And this is an advice that can be applied to anything other than science, to every career, that you have to find a place that is supportive and to find people that are willing to share, so you can learn more and you have someone that is cheering for you and that is giving you the resources for you to succeed. Okay, our time is almost up, but before we thank you, I wanted to add that if you are interested, even as a high schooler, to learn more about science, please go out and find opportunities to get your hands dirty. And we have some opportunities here at the Max Planck Florida Institute for high schoolers. So if you are interested, please go on our website, mpfi.org, or you can email me at education@mpfi.org. You can follow us on social media. And so please try to act on your interest and to find opportunities to get involved. So I want to end by thanking all our panelists. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your experience as scientists and hopefully encourage someone to explore this opportunity. I also want to thank Katie Edwards, our head of communication, Katie Albertini, our digital media designer, and also all the MPFI IT department for making this event possible. You're going to see now the link for our survey. Please fill it and give us your feedback so we can improve next year. And hopefully next year we are going to be able to have the event in person here at Max Planck. Thanks again on everyone. And I'm going to look forward to see all our viewers in person here at our next event. Thank you so much, and thanks to the panelists.
Thank you, Ilaria.
Thank you.